Hello and a warm welcome to Personal Finance. I am Gugulethu Cele. Joining me from Cape Town tonight is Sanlam Employee Benefits Chief Marketing Actuary Viresh Maharaj to unpack the annual Sanlam Employee Benefits Benchmark Survey, which is tagged as the most comprehensive research into retirement in South Africa. Viresh, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Maybe if we run through the overall objectives of this benchmark survey. How long has it been around for, and what's changed since it originally commenced?
Hi Gugu, and to all your viewers. The Sanlam Benchmark Survey has been running since 1981, and we're in the 24th iteration of the research itself. It's South Africa's most comprehensive and most in-depth view of retirement in the country, as it surveys 100 freestanding funds, 100 participating employers and umbrella funds, 10 union funds, 503 active members currently saving towards retirement, and another 302 pensioners who are receiving an income in retirement, so that we can understand the length and breadth of the retirement challenges that we face in this country. Now, initially the survey it started off quite small, and it considered just freestanding funds, because back in the 80s, that's what was around. You had these large defined benefit funds, and through the late 80s and 90s, we saw the shift to defined contribution funds. In the more recent history, over the previous 10 years, we've seen as dramatic, in fact, a more dramatic shift from standalone funds through to umbrella funds. And that's why over the past 5 years, we at Sanlam have started including participating employees and umbrella funds in the survey, so that we can be on the pulse of what's driving the shift and where the shift is taking us in the retirement funding landscape.
Viresh, overall, is this shift in a positive move for South African consumers?
Absolutely. The shift from standalone to umbrella funds has been one of the fundamental changes that has happened over the past 10 years, and it's been an absolutely positive change for a number of reasons. Firstly, umbrella funds are run by large sponsoring entities that have the governance and capital to back the decisions made. In this sense, they're able to get the best in the business to act as trustees and to act as decision makers in executing the retirement funding to the express interests of retirement fund members. Moving from a standalone to an umbrella space also has a cost impact depending on the size of the fund involved. What we have in South Africa is quite a normal distribution, where you've got a large number of very small employers and a small number of very, very big ones. Now, for those very large ones, an umbrella fund may not yet be the right move, because they've already got the economies of scale in their structure. But for the vast majority of South African companies and South African employers, umbrella funds make sense because A, they're cheaper to run than a standalone fund, and B, the hassle of running a fund is far, far less. And C, you can actually entrust the retirement savings of your employees through to a professional entity who do this as their actual day job, and not to trustees from a small employer who are entrusted with the financial savings of the rest of the employees.
Are we finding that employers are prioritizing the retirement savings of their workers?
Unfortunately not. The research has shown that employers have actually, to a large extent, abdicated their role in the retirement funding process due to the shift from a defined benefit environment where they were very, very paternalistic towards defined contribution, where the risk has now been transferred through to the employee themselves. Employers do play a role, but it seems to be as low touch a role as possible, as they see it as a responsibility of the individual employee as well as that of the fund to move them towards a better outcome in retirement. In analyzing this retirement funding system, we've actually identified that the employer plays the absolutely critical role in influencing how decisions are made and how the fund is structured to help their employees move towards that better day one. There are a number of ways that they can do so, because they've got the infrastructure to communicate through to employees. They've got the processes in place to influence decisions at critical points, including day one of employment, where you've got to make decisions about your retirement funding. Now, we've all sat through an orientation or induction, typically run by the HR department of a company, where they go through quite a bit of information about this is who we are, this is what we do, and there's an information overload at that point. Typically, thereafter, you need to fill in a number of forms, including your medical aid options, other deductions that need to be made, insurance options, as well as decisions about retirement funding. Now, this is done under a significant amount of duress because you've got to do it by a particular point in time without the necessary communication or education or guidance from HR, because they typically lack the skills to provide that guidance or are constrained by FACE to provide advice at that point. And what we found is that employees tend to look at each other and say, well, what are you doing? And then they select what their neighbors are doing. This is not good. And the situation is exacerbated by our finding that 7 out of every 10 South African employees don't ever revisit that initial decision they've made at day one. So they make a decision when they join, and they don't ever take ownership of reviewing it if their circumstances change or as they understand how to plan for retirement better.
On the topic of employees obviously failing to understand exactly what they're investing in, are we finding though that South African employees are investing enough money into their retirement savings?
Typically, what we find is that due to the structure of the retirement funds, employees invest on average between 12 and 14% per month into their retirement funds. So that, taken over a significant amount of time, gets you to a decent replacement ratio. Yes, you're not going to be traveling the world, but you're not going to be living in poverty. So on a monthly basis, yes, South African employees tend to invest enough month to month. However, that's not the issue that's at play here. Because what we find is that, yes, they invest, but when they change employers, they resign from one and move to another, they've got an opportunity to cash in their retirement savings. And a disturbingly high proportion of South Africans take that opportunity and use that to settle debt. In fact, we found that about 6 out of every 10 South Africans who cashes in their retirement savings when changing employers use that money to settle short-term and to a lesser extent some long-term debt. Now, this effectively reboots their retirement savings to point naught each time they change employers. Now, we've done a bit of calculation around this, and we've assumed that a young person changes jobs every 5 years. Based on a starting salary of, say, 5,000 Rand per month, and with an average salary increase of 6% per year, we find that if you change jobs every 5 years and you cash out your retirement savings in its entirety, by the time you reach retirement, you would be 16 times worse off than had you kept your money in a retirement vehicle throughout your career. Someone who had done that would have 16 times more money than you, and that makes a material difference in the quality of your life leading up to and through retirement.
The numbers that you're quoting clearly paint a harsh reality for a lot of South African consumers, Viresh, and we certainly hope that a lot of South African consumers will heed the call here to save more efficiently for their retirement. But I want to get your view on the different age groups. Are we finding that millennials and those who are slightly younger are preparing themselves and are actively involved in their retirement planning versus their more mature counterparts?
I think intuitively we wouldn't expect that, and empirically from the research we find that it is not the case. Typically what we find is that people really start planning for retirement about 10 years before their actual retirement date. In fact, 2/3 of pensioners only first received advice within 10 years of retiring. Now, by that stage, it becomes very difficult to take the steps necessary to ensure a decent quality of life in retirement, because time is no longer on your side. You don't have the opportunity to benefit from the power of compound interest as much as young people do. In engaging with young people, what we've found is that they're very trusting of their employers, but they do not make correct decisions at every single point in their careers to this point. Typically at induction phase, it's about choosing the lowest contribution option to maximize your take-home pay, which makes sense at that point in time. But in doing so, they're having the effect of jeopardizing their lifetime wealth creation. Younger people tend to cash out their retirement savings more regularly than older people due to the turnaround in jobs now. Older people would stay in jobs for far longer than younger people now. And the frequency of changing jobs for younger people is higher, so the opportunity to cash out their retirement savings is greater, and therefore they face a greater risk of rebooting their retirement savings more often than their older colleagues have faced.
Well, it's time for us to recap on some of the key takeaways from this discussion tonight. And Viresh, what I really want to get out from you is what us as South African consumers can really learn from the takeaway points from the benchmark survey.
There are a handful of takeaways. The first is that we each need to take ownership of our retirement funding journeys. In fact, even if we view it as lifetime wealth creation as opposed to retirement, that's even better because we struggle to see ourselves in the future. If we see this as something that's affecting our wealth right now, then we're able to take ownership and actually take the steps necessary to understand where we are in this journey and how we can improve our potential outcome by the time we retire. So my advice to South African consumers is to go check your benefit statements from your funds. We found that a too large proportion, in bordering about 40% of employees, don't ever check their annual benefit statements, so they're not aware of what's sitting in their retirement fund. So that's step one, to know, okay, what's in there. Step two is to know what are you invested in. Have a look at your investment options. Have a look, if you're invested in the trustee default choice, what is that default? Does it make sense for you? Because a default makes sense on average, but it may not make sense for you as an individual, and that's where individual level choice comes in. Seek advice from a respected advisor. When we've compared the outcomes of what we've classified to be affluent pensioners versus the typical pensioner, one of the key findings was that affluent pensioners tended to seek advice 80% and were 80% more likely to seek advice than the typical pensioner. And this is telling. The other takeaway is to engage your employer. Understand what is going into your retirement fund. Ask questions, read widely, and start engaging with yourself and others, especially your family and your spouse, on your retirement funding journey, and have a destination in mind. There's an old saying that if you don't know where you're going, you'll just end up where you get. Know where you want to be so that you can take the steps to take you there.
Proactiveness. Viresh, thank you so much for your time this evening. You've certainly given us quite a lot to think about when it comes to effective and efficient retirement planning. Well, that's where we leave it for Personal Finance this evening. A big thank you once more to Viresh Maharaj, Sanlam Employee Benefits Chief Marketing Actuary, joining us this evening. Remember to get in touch with us. We want to hear from you, so send us any of your tweets or comments to @CNBC Africa using the hashtag Finance410 or to myself @Gugulethu. Until next time, it's goodbye for now.